Hi, my name's Bryn. When the hurricane ripped my house apart, I thought, at least I still have family. But when I showed up at my brother's door, his wife looked me dead in the eye and said, "We need privacy. Go home. Don't be a burden anymore." I stood on that porch, soaked in rain, clutching my mother's ashes. And I realized, maybe it wasn't the storm that left me homeless. It was them. So I stopped knocking, and I started remembering everything they tried to erase. But if I was invisible to them, why are they so scared now? The rain didn't just fall, it attacked. It slammed sideways against my once green shutters with a vengeance, as though it too had grown tired of pretending everything was okay. I stood barefoot in the hallway, my arms limp at my sides, trying to catch my breath. The air inside was thick and cold, wet with sorrow and rot. I reached for the wall to steady myself, but the wallpaper peeled off beneath my fingers like skin that no longer wanted to hold. And the floors were slick, glistening under a layer of stormwater. Photographs floated along the hallway like wreckage on a river. Mom's smile, now water-blurred. Our old Christmas photo curling at the corners. The kitchen table, the one I inherited with the house, had cracked clean across the middle as if it had been holding too much for too long. The curtains, once bright yellow, now sagged heavy and stained, clinging to the windows like soaked regrets. This wasn't just my house, it was the last piece of her. My mother, my foundation. Now it was gone. I dropped to my knees, right there in the middle of the living room, my jeans darkening as they soaked up the muddy water. My hands trembled as I reached for a trash bag, slicing it open with a key from my pocket. The cat circled me, mewling low, tail puffed and soaked, unsure where to hide in this unfamiliar nightmare. I packed what I could, the few photo frames that hadn't warped in the flood, the small ceramic figurine Mom bought in Santa Fe, a couple of jewelry boxes that hadn't floated off into the walls. I wrapped them in plastic, my fingers numb but moving. I tried not to think about how Callista would laugh if she saw me like this, crawling through the wreckage of a life. But this was my life. I tossed the bag over my shoulder, slipped the cat into his carrier, and opened the front door. The wind howled, pushing rain sideways into my face as if the storm had been waiting just outside, teeth bared. I stepped into it anyway, shoulders hunched, clothes immediately clinging like another betrayal. Water ran into my boots. I didn't care. I got into the car, shut the door, and sat for a moment, breathing heavily as rain hammered the roof like 1,000 fists. I turned the ignition. The engine sputtered, then finally caught. The wipers groaned across the windshield, trying to make sense of a world turned to water. I drove. I drove past fallen limbs, garbage bins turned over in the street, mailboxes uprooted, power lines sagged, traffic lights blinked yellow like uncertain advice. Everything looked like the end of something. But I still held on to something small. A set of keys on a chain Mom had given me when I left for college. Her initials carved into the metal. "So you always know where you belong," she had said with a smile that made me feel like I mattered in a way no one else ever had. I pulled into Ronan's driveway just as a flicker of lightning lit the sky. Their porch lights glowed soft and golden, making their house look warm, safe, untouched. Like life had passed over them and landed squarely on me. I knocked, heart hammering, water dripping from every edge of me. The door creaked open halfway before I could knock again. Callista. She looked as perfect as always, hair blown out, face smooth with judgment. She wore a satin robe that cost more than my monthly rent, and her nails were pristine despite the chaos outside. She leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, lips curled just so. "I'm here," I said. My voice cracked from cold, from everything. She stared for a beat too long. "We need privacy," she said, tone crisp as ice. "You're not a child anymore, Bryn. Don't be a burden." I blinked. Rain slid down my face, but I didn't flinch. I reached out to take the towel she reluctantly offered, white, clean, thin as her patience. I clutched it around me like armor. Behind her, Ronan said nothing. I looked past her shoulder, hoping for a glimpse of my brother, of some shared history, some hint of the boy who once held my hand during thunderstorms. But he was nowhere. His silence stung deeper than the rain. The door didn't slam. It clicked. That soft, deliberate sound gutted me more than shouting ever could. I stood there, keychain clenched in my fist, towel barely shielding me from the world. And then the latch thunked. They sealed me out like I'd never belonged at all. The sky cracked open again as I stepped off their porch, wind tearing at my coat, water sloshing into my boots. I made it back to the car, barely able to see through the sheets of rain. I slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and just sat. The cat cried quietly in his crate beside me. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes red, hair matted, face pale and drawn, a stranger. I looked down at the keychain in my lap, water beading on its metal surface. Mom's initials, her gift, her belief in me. A memory swelled, her warm hand folding my fingers around it at the bus stop, her saying softly, "Wherever you go, remember, anywhere I belong, you belong." But I hadn't belonged here in a long time, not in that house, not in Ronan's life, not in the world that Callista had drawn around herself like a velvet curtain. I started the engine again, knuckles white against the steering wheel. I drove. Every motel I passed had a glowing red "no vacancy" sign. The wind rocked the car. I could barely see the road. My tank was nearly dry, but I didn't stop until I saw the soft hum of a strip mall parking lot. A grocery store, a dollar store, a closed hair salon. Empty, forgotten. Just like me. I pulled into a spot under a dying street lamp and killed the engine. The car clicked and groaned as it settled. I reached into the back, pulled the towel tighter around my shoulders, and climbed into the passenger seat. The cat curled up on my lap, trembling but alive. The rain softened, tapping lightly on the metal roof like fingertips on a drum. I sat back, letting the quiet surround me. And I wondered, at what point had I stopped being someone worth showing up for? At what moment did I turn into an inconvenience to people who once swore they loved me? I didn't know the answer, but I held the keychain tighter. And I whispered, not for them, but for me. You made me feel like I didn't belong, but I do, somewhere. And I will find it. Outside, the rain began to slow. The storm didn't win. Not entirely. I was still here. I thought that night would be the lowest point. But pain has a way of finding deeper levels. Dawn came slow, gray light seeping through the rain-streaked windows of my car. The seat was cold against my back. The passenger door was barely closed. My neck stiff from sleeping upright. I blinked awake, half-dazed. My cat shifted beside me, paws kneading the towel I tucked across my lap. Outside, the drumming of rain softened into a steady patter. I pushed at the windshield with my sleeve, clearing a fogged patch. The world outside looked damp, hollow. I yawned, trying to stretch before I rose, but movement sent a sharp ache through my ribs. I sighed. There was no motel, no rescue. Just this car, this damp little cocoon, and the ache in my heart that no towel can dry. By mid-morning, hunger settled in my stomach. I drove slowly toward a diner I used to visit before Callista redecorated the house in her attention. The sign flickered, open, in letters dulled by years. I stepped inside. Wood floors, the smell of bacon, the clatter of plates. People chatted softly over coffee, but no one looked at me as I slung damp coat over a chair. I asked for black coffee. Bacon and eggs sounded too heavy. While I sipped, I watched families file in. Mothers helped children settle into booths. Fathers teased little sisters. My mind drifted to a childhood birthday. How Mom made a cake just for Ronan's choice, then said, "Take what you want, Bryn." There wasn't enough for both birthdays. I held back tears. Twist S3. I was the afterthought. That's what I'd been all along. I left without finishing. I shut the door behind me and let the heat of the diner fade behind my back. Drizzle followed me to the car. I started it, letting wipers slash water across glass, headlights dim in streaks of gray. I tried shelters. I called 2 lines. Each voice answered with formality, then sorrow, then no vacancy. "You must be registered ahead of time," they said. I couldn't register ahead of time. I drove past churches offering help signs, parking lots full, people lined up. I passed by a FEMA mobile unit, too far away for the bus. My gas gauge hovered near empty. I flicked on the windshield wipers, the rain mixing with tears I wouldn't let fall. By afternoon, I found a small cafe with a bay window, chairs that creaked, the smell of roasted beans. I paid $5 for a latte and asked someone at the counter if I could plug in my phone. The barista frowned at the cable, older than she was, and shook her head. Sorry, we don't allow charging unless you buy more than one item. I stared at her slowly. I had exactly $20. I ordered the cheapest thing, muffin, dark roast. I sat, watching the phone blink. 4%? Then 3. I opened email, checked rentals. Nothing I could afford. Nothing safe. Everything out in the suburbs or with mold and sky-high rent. My name. It didn't matter. At a table near the window, a voice startled me. Bryn? Is that you? An old neighbor's voice, Ms. Dawson, who once brought over homemade jambalaya when Mom was sick. She paused. I turned. Her eyes flicked from my damp coat to my face. She forced a smile. You look different. She sipped her tea loud. I hope you're okay. I nodded, said, I will be. She didn't ask more. I didn't tell more. Evening came with twilight rain. I returned to the car. The engine felt heavy, as though it shared my fatigue. I sat for a while before I dared to move. Rain dripped off mirror edges onto my lap, cold dampness creeping in. I looked out and thought of all the places I used to call home. The house with Mom's voice in every hallway, the kitchen where Dad let me stir the biscuit batter. Those vanished moments now replaced by this damp seat, the sound of wipers, and my own echoing heart. I turned on the radio, old country station, slow-drawn guitar. The voice in the song talked about leaving someone who never saw you. I clutched the steering wheel. The stereo crackled. Twist S9, shelter denied, echoed. When I finally texted Ronan, I'm trying to hold on. I stared at the screen, waiting. Nothing. I deleted the message. I tucked the phone under the seat, cold heat pulsing in my fingers where I'd typed. I promised myself I would not beg again. Night fell fully. I watched the first few stars, though rain clouds hid most. I hugged the keychain Mom's initials. My cat purred softly, a tiny living warmth. I thought, if I keep giving, eventually someone would see me. That lie haunted me. Then the phone buzzed, light cutting through dark. Ronan. I swallowed the lump in my throat, held the phone. He said, Sorry, Callista thinks this isn't a good time. Maybe try Aunt Lucy? My chest twisted. I pressed reply, but the words weren't there. I let go of the phone. Instead, I held the towel tighter around my shoulders. Outside, rain tapped the roof of the car like a slow, steady drum. I closed my eyes and let quiet rage bloom. I won't wait for someone else's schedule of comfort. I won't ask anymore. That line was the first piece of armor I put back on. When I drove out of that drizzle, keychain swinging in my hand, I didn't know I was stepping into a mirror of my past. But once I saw that old neighborhood, I saw everything I'd buried. I parked across the street from Ronan's house just after sunset. The orange glow from the porch lamp flickered over siding damp from rain, framed by magnolia trees heavy with moisture. I stayed low in the driver's seat, letting memories flood. Mom's laughter drifting from that porch when Ronan's kids ran circles around the yard, me trying to tag along, laughter always aimed at someone else. Light spilled from inside, silhouette passing behind windows. I remembered the reunion photo, a family picnic in their backyard. My mother standing between Ronan and me in a sundress, hands clasped behind. Then later, childhood friends left that image out when posting it online. The banner image now, me gone. Just Ronan and Mom, wide smiles, me replaced by empty space. They erased me, piece by piece. And I let them. I shut off the car, doors squeaking in the humidity. Mosquitoes buzzed. I watched as kids rode bikes past, parents talking, oblivious to the drama behind closed doors. Houses lit by soft lamps looked cozy. A house should feel cozy. For years, I wished mine would. I drove a few blocks to an old park where Mom used to bring me on weekends. The swings creaked, no one else around now but mosquitoes biting. I sat on the swing, feet inches from the damp grass. I closed my eyes and pulled out my phone, voice notes from Mom. Her words, delicate, supportive. One said, "Bryn, always keep notes of what you've done. One day, someone will need to see you were here." I swallowed hard, tears threatening. I recorded my own voice. They didn't just forget me, they needed me quiet so they could be loud. Then I backed up to a memory of land, our family land that I signed away so Ronan could get a house loan. I was told it would be safe, that those papers were symbolic. But seeing Ronan's house now, new siding, new windows, the same place I once thought I'd find refuge, I felt used. Because I wasn't naive, I was hopeful. Hopeful that family meant more than profit. Later, I sat in a booth at a small cafe near downtown. Late afternoon sun filtered through lace curtains, the smell of cinnamon and brewed coffee. I closed my eyes, thinking of the house being built, the rooms painted, the doors hung, all while I slept in a car. The injustice of being denied a bed under his roof while he built walls with someone else's agreement on paper. Among old bills and bank statements, I unearthed a voicemail from my bank. Callista co-signed on a loan using my Social Security for a car I never even owned. That fact surprised me only in how long she could do it without telling me. I sat quiet, tearing at the edge of a receipt, a letter I found in Mom's belongings, crinkled at the corners. To Bryn, my compass in silence, the true keeper of this family's heart. The phrase lanced through me, warmth and grief mingled. Night came, deep and humid. I drove to a 24-hour laundromat, the hum of washers, fluorescent lights flickering, the smell of detergent strong in the air. I sat folding damp clothes. Each sock, each shirt felt like part of me. I folded, I pressed creases, I straightened hems, as though folding clothes could iron out betrayal. Then I called Ronan, my voice steady. "Do you remember me agreeing to help you with papers? Do you remember giving those away so family would stay whole?" There was silence, then him replying carefully, "I thought it was what Mom wanted." I said, "What you thought doesn't erase what I signed, what I did, what I gave. I'm tired of being unseen." He didn't answer further. The laundromat clock ticked past midnight. I left quarters and machines, grabbed my damp laundry in plastic bags, nursed a cold coffee, and made my way to an empty bench near a fountain downtown. The fountain gurgled, wet stones reflecting streetlights. I looked at the sky, heavy with clouds. I held the letter Mom had left, the keychain, the phone. They felt like tools now, not safety nets, but weapons of proof. I whispered to no one, "This ends when they see my part in this story." That single line, "This is not a revenge story," was the first piece of armor I put back on. When I pushed the laundromat door closed behind me, the metal frame groaned against the wind, and the night air struck my cheeks, sharp, wet, but no longer empty. For the first time in days, I felt something move in me that wasn't sadness or exhaustion, not anger either. It was quieter than all of that. It was clarity. I slid into my car, soaked laundry bag in the back seat, the cat curled in his crate, fast asleep despite the clatter of rain. Mom's letter was folded twice and tucked into the inside pocket of my coat, but it felt heavier than the coat itself. Her words had weight. They always had. I drove under dim street lamps, the kind that blinked slowly like tired eyes, rain running down the windshield in quiet rivers. I wasn't sure where I was headed, not yet. But the road was familiar, and the act of moving felt sacred. I whispered her words out loud in the car, just to hear them in my own voice. This is not a revenge story. This is a story about reclaiming what was mine. The next morning, I woke up in the motel room just before sunrise. The ache in my shoulders told me I hadn't rested well, but I got up anyway. The room smelled like dust and detergent. A patch of ceiling above the bed had started to peel, curling like a question mark. I brewed the motel's bitter coffee in the corner pot, the steam curling against the frosted glass window. Outside, the sky was a deep bruise, purple bleeding into gray. Somewhere beyond the trees, I could hear early traffic, tires slicing water, engines humming forward. I held Mom's letter again, tracing the handwriting with my finger. That morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I sat upright. I opened my phone. I recorded my voice. Just one line. "This is not a revenge story." I listened to it back. It sounded steady, not bitter, just certain. Later that morning, still wrapped in that quiet certainty, I turned on the motel's small television and switched to the local news. A feature story was already in progress. My eyes widened when I saw her. Callista. Perfect hair, perfect posture, lit in soft tones by a camera crew that clearly adored her. She smiled on screen, standing in front of a local shelter. The anchor called her an inspiring voice for change in our community. My mouth dried. They were featuring her for a segment on compassionate innovation in outreach. Her new program, they said, was a breakthrough in transitional housing support. A miracle. A vision. Her vision. They even showed the logo. Home Again Hope. And that's when my hand dropped the coffee mug. It shattered against the tile floor, small cracks running like veins through the ceramic. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. Home again. Hope. Those were my words, my phrase, the tagline I'd dreamed up during a late dinner at Ronan's house 3 years ago. Back when we sat around the oak table drinking boxed red wine, laughing about our childhood, brainstorming ways we could help. I remembered how Callista leaned in when I explained the name, asked me for the pitch deck, wanted the mission statement. I'd sent it the next morning. Then, silence. And now, there she was, smiling into the camera while Ronan stood beside her like a loyal second act. He smiled too, proud, agreeable, the way he'd always been when it was easier to stand still than to speak truth. Not once did they mention my name. Not once did they say the idea came from anyone but her. I drove straight to Aunt Lucy's. She's technically Mom's cousin, but she's always been more like a quiet guardian, keeping history, holding space. Her small brick house still had the rosebush Mom planted decades ago, and the same wind chimes that rattled like glass laughter on the porch. I sat on her swing. The paint flaked beneath my hands. I told her everything. How I'd seen my idea on TV, dressed up in Callista's voice. How they played snippets of my original words without giving me a single ounce of credit. How Ronan's silence hurt more than Callista's theft. Aunt Lucy said nothing for a long moment. Then she took my hand. "They stole your story," she said softly. Then they made sure no one asked who really wrote the pages. That line stayed with me all the way back to the motel. In the evening, I powered up the old laptop I'd rescued from the water damage, along with Mom's external hard drive. The glow of the motel lamp was yellow and faint, casting shadows against the walls. On the table, notebooks, scattered receipts, my old pitch folders, and a small photo of Mom standing in front of her first group shelter. I opened a file. Home Again. Proposal, DocsEx. The date stamped on it read, 6 months before Callista ever announced her vision. The document had all the original drafts, my own budget line suggestions, ideas for modular housing, grant connections, even personal testimony from displaced families I'd spoken to. Then I opened a voice memo. Mom's voice. Soft, crackly, real. She was talking through an idea I'd mentioned on a phone call, about dignity, about making transitional housing feel like home. I listened to her say, "You're onto something, Bryn. You just have to keep going. Even when they pretend they don't see you." Tears filled my eyes, but they didn't spill. Not this time. I called Marisol, a journalist friend from way back. She answered via video chat, her room stacked with books and secondhand prints. Her cat climbed behind her on the couch. "I have a story," I said. She listened. She didn't interrupt once. When I told her about the shelter segment, about the stolen project name, about the receipts, her eyebrows lifted. "Do you want to tell your version?" she asked. "Your truth?" "No," I replied. "I want to tell the truth, not to shame, but to set the record straight. I want people to understand what happens when someone builds something off the back of another woman's silence." She nodded slowly. "There's interest in that," she said. "People are starting to care about the quiet voices behind public victories." That night, after our call ended, I sat back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. Then I opened a blank document. I typed, "This is not a revenge story. This is a story about reclaiming what was mine." Each word felt like a thread pulled through the fabric of something long torn. I saved the file. I dated it. Then I brewed tea. Midnight Earl Grey, Mom's favorite. I held the mug close, warming my fingers. Outside, the motel parking lot was half empty. A diner down the street cast gold light into the night, like a beacon for the still awake, the not yet defeated. I watched the cars pass, their headlights tracing shadows on the wall. I read Mom's letter one more time. Her last line clung to me like a lifeline. To Bryn, my compass in silence, the true keeper of this family's heart. I didn't cry. I breathed. And I began to make a plan, not just to reclaim credit, but to reclaim my name, my legacy, and my voice. They had built their house on my blueprint. It was time they saw what happens when the foundation speaks. And the first step to reclaiming was learning to speak where I'd once whispered. I left Aunt Lucy's porch under dusk's soft glow, Mom's letter heavy in my bag, the outlines of my growing plan tight in my mind. That night, back in the motel, I lay awake, watching ceiling tiles stained with raindrips, listening to the buzz of traffic far off, thinking about Leah. Morning light was weak and gray. The motel walls smelled faintly of mildew, coffee from the lobby downstairs weaving through the hallway. I dressed in what felt like dignity, clean shirt, Mom's old scarf, and went to get mail. When I slid open the door, a small envelope was tucked just under it. Thick white paper, edges uneven as if handmade. I picked it up, heart tightening. The handwriting was childlike, Leah's. Thank you for always being nice to me, Aunt Bryn. I miss you. Glitter stickers of stars and butterflies decorated the edges. She had folded it carefully. I read it twice, fingertips trembling. I pressed it against my chest and sat on the edge of the bed, tears pooling. It felt like someone had thrown me a life ring in dark waters. That letter was the first sign I hadn't been completely erased. I found myself pulling out my phone, opening the family group chat, only to see it vanished. It no longer existed. I scrolled through messages from months ago looking for a note I sent when Grandma died. A condolence message, something heartfelt, comforting. I found it. I'm here for you, always. Clicked it. The screen blinked. Message no longer available. It was as if they'd scrubbed parts of me from memory. I closed the app, breathing shallow. But that letter from Leah? I tucked it into my journal. I wrote under it in my neatest handwriting. I am not the fragile one. I am not the burden. I am the archive. I folded that page and slipped the letter under it as if sealing something sacred. I labeled a manila folder Truth. Inside, I placed a copy of the note, scans of old deleted messages from my archives, prints of screenshot where I once reached out, left voice messages unheard. Exhibit A, Erasure. I named that folder in my computer. It felt small, but it was mine. Later that day, I drafted a message to Callista. Thank Leah for the note. It reminded me of who I am and who I'm not. My fingers hovered over send for a moment, fear flickering in my chest. I pressed send. Nothing. No reply. No acknowledgement. But this silence felt different. Not like a wound reopened, but like fuel gathering. Evening came with weak sunlight slipping through motel curtains. I boiled water for noodles, stared at steam rising. I thought about all the times I swallowed that ache of being ignored, uncredited. The nausea when someone praised her project, the qualms I never voiced. The unfairness of labor, ideas, voice, taken, adapted, credited to another. It was theft. And it had been legalized by silence. I wrote in the empty document on my laptop, the words forming slowly. This is not a revenge story. This is a story about reclaiming what was mine. I saved that as a draft. Underneath, I listed evidence. Leah's letter. Screenshot of deleted condolence message. My original draft of the pitch deck. Voice memos where I rehearsed part of the mission statement. Receipts where I bought supplies for outreach events. Timestamps of my emails to Ronan's inbox. Audio recordings of Mom speaking of the shelter plan long ago. Night pressed hard. Streetlights outside flickered orange through rain-clouded windows. My cat purred beside the keyboard. I held Leah's letter again, pressed the butterflies with my thumb. Sweet child, I whispered. You brought me back to sky. Then a buzz. An email. My phone lit up. Subject: regarding your outreach proposal. I opened it fast. It was from a journalist, Marisol. She said, read your folder. I want to talk about a piece. The voices people left out. When can we record? My throat tightened. I stared at the screen. A mix of awe, apprehension, shaky joy. Someone saw me. My vision blurred with what-ifs. What if I speak now and nobody listens? What if they twist my words? I paused. But then I remembered Leah's note. That spark. I typed reply. Thank you. I'd like tomorrow morning. Lying back in bed, I closed my eyes. The roar of highway, the drip from AC unit, distant sirens, they all felt less like threats and more like backdrop to something shifting. I thought of that letter from Mom in the pocket of my coat, the archive label, Leah's simple, I miss you. All of it stitched together into thread I could wear as armor. Tomorrow, I would use those words. I would gather witnesses. I would reach into silence and pull out truth. The erasure had been subtle, insidious, almost imperceptible, like a shadow creeping over the brightest moments of my life. But tonight, I decided I would build a spotlight sharp enough to illuminate every omission, every lie, every theft that had been laid at my feet. I left the motel room long before dawn, the fog thick and curling over the pavement like smoke, the chill of the early morning air biting through my coat. Each breath felt deliberate, grounding, a reminder that I had returned not as a victim, not as someone to be overlooked, but as someone who carried truth as armor. My car sliced through the muted street, headlights barely piercing the mist, and my hands gripped the steering wheel with taut determination. Evidence, meticulously gathered, lined up in my mind like soldiers preparing for battle, each document, each memo, each recorded voice a testament to what had been mine all along. Tonight was not about revenge, it was about reclamation. I dressed simply for the gala, carefully choosing a modest black dress I had once worn to Mom's memorial, pearl earrings that she had given me, and a pair of low heels that clicked softly against the motel's cracked tile. No flamboyance, no unnecessary shine. I needed to be seen, but not for the wrong reasons. I needed my truth to speak, and for that, I could not be overshadowed by glitter or gowns or the superficial applause of others. Tonight was about facts. Tonight was about acknowledgement. Pulling up to the old Marriott ballroom just after 6, the city hummed around me. Valet cars gleamed under the pale wash of street lamps, and the air smelled of polished leather, fresh rain, and the faint perfume trailing guests who moved with practiced grace. Music floated from the open doors, an elegant symphony that heralded sophistication and ceremony. People in tuxedos and cocktail dresses stepped along the red carpet, photographers snapping without pause, cameras flashing like bursts of lightning. I handed my name badge to the greeter, a polite nod exchanged. Guest, brought by Marisol Alvarez, he said, scanning his tablet. I nodded again, looking up at the marquee in quiet satisfaction. Community Leaders Gala, honoring humanitarian excellence. Inside, the room shimmered with a formal kind of beauty, tables draped in immaculate white tablecloths, silver candelabras reflecting soft light, bouquets of pristine white hydrangeas on each center table. Callista stood on stage ahead of schedule, chatting with a reporter, her laughter soft, rehearsed, practiced, the kind that hid calculation. The moment came, the announcement of her award. Callista Monroe, the voice over the microphone rang through the hall, for her service to displaced families. Applause erupted as if on cue, candles glowing and guests rising, a wave of admiration washing over her. I recognized the words she spoke, almost perfectly. The cadence, the phrasing, even the opening line. Every syllable a memory of what I had written years ago. And yet, not once was my name mentioned. Not once. My fingers curled around the edge of my purse, knuckles white. The anger settled deep in my gut, cold and burning all at once. Yet I held myself still, maintaining a posture of calm that belied the storm roiling inside. I could not, would not, allow the scene to rob me of composure. The lights, the music, the applause, all of it was the stage for someone else's narrative. But I had a story too, and I would ensure it was heard. I couldn't stay, not in that moment of false celebration. Turning with deliberate care, I walked out through a side hallway, past walls lined with photos of past honorees whose smiles were frozen in history, past tuxedo jackets draped casually over chairs, waiters balancing trays of champagne with the practiced ease of trained acrobats. The plush carpet muted my heels' steps as I slipped from the echo of applause like a ghost leaving a gathering that was never mine to claim. Outside, the air was heavy, humid, and real. I drew a deep breath and let the tension seep out, the memory of erasure still hot in my chest, but transforming now into purpose. I drove toward the storage unit district, a cluster of roll-up doors and dim fluorescent lights, the scent of dust and stale air clinging to everything. My throat was dry, voice swallowed by the stillness. I unlocked the unit my mother had rented years ago, boxes stacked with meticulous care, each labeled, "For Bryn." I opened the crate closest to the corner, careful, reverent. Inside lay handmade linens, pillowcases embroidered with delicate floral patterns, the kind my mother had stitched in long afternoons by candlelight. Some were faded, frayed slightly along the edges, but the craftsmanship spoke of love and care that time could never dull. Beneath the linens lay a sealed envelope, tape yellowed with age, Mom's handwriting curling across the front. To be read when you remember who you were. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal, a thrill of anticipation mingled with heartbreak washing over me. Inside, the contents were more than nostalgic keepsakes. There was the original deed transfer contract, Mom's handwriting clear and deliberate, my signature affirming claim to what had been mine. Legal proof that my ownership had once been recognized and recorded. And there, alongside the legal papers, the linens, fragile and beautiful, stitched with hands I would never forget. Proof, my mother had said once, a home is built on love, yes, but also on evidence. Proof that the life you create is yours, yours to claim. And now, proof that could not be ignored. Evening deepened into twilight as I left the storage unit, the box tucked safely into my back seat, deed and linens pressed close to me as though their presence could shield me from the injustice endured. The streets glowed softly under streetlights, children riding bikes until the last scraps of daylight vanished, neighbors' voices drifting over fences. Earlier that day, Callista had stormed into a garage sale I passed on my way here. She had stopped short at those very linens, the ones I now cradled, faded but radiant in their authenticity. A woman had told her they belonged to her mother-in-law. I had felt something fracture in me then, ownership violated, memory misappropriated. But tonight, armed with proof, I would reclaim both. I returned to the ballroom, the familiar glow of chandeliers casting prisms across polished floors. Callista posed with community leaders, smiling as if the applause was hers alone. A photographer leaned close. "Looks like you've done amazing work," he said. Callista's reply was automatic, measured. "Thanks, but it's a team effort," she said, not once acknowledging me, not once recognizing the quiet architect behind the public display. I clipped the deed from my folder, pressed the linens to my chest, and re-entered the ballroom, the hum of music and chatter pressing in from all sides. Guests leaned in toward each other, forks tapping plates, glasses chiming. I moved with deliberate certainty to where Callista stood at a refreshment table, her expression shifting as our eyes met. "You came," she said, polite, cautious, an edge of curiosity in her tone. I held up the deed, my voice steady, unwavering. "These were mine. These are mine." Heads turned, conversations faltered. Silence fell across a patch of the room. "They were in a bin at the storage unit. You listed them for sale. And this contract," I pressed the paper between my fingers, "my name, my claim, you erased it. You made a career of taking what is not yours." Callista's face flushed, her tone pitched higher, nearly amused. "You can't just take items like that," she said. I nodded, linen bundle in hand. "Neither can you, but you've made it your profession. Tonight, the record is straight." The room quieted completely. Guests shifted in their chairs, curiosity alight in their eyes, whispers passing like wind through leaves. I turned toward the exit, deed clutched tight, a mixture of humiliation and triumph pulsing in my chest. Camera flashes punctuated the moment, capturing more than just a photo. They caught a woman reclaiming her voice, asserting her truth where none had dared to speak. Back at the motel later, I closed the door behind me. The deed rested on the desk, the linens on the bed, and I reopened Mom's envelope once more. If anyone ever tries to erase you, start here. Beside it, the deed sat like a cornerstone, the linens a tangible echo of a mother's love and foresight. I folded them carefully, feeling her hands in every stitch, every loop of thread, every faded pattern. Standing in the dim lamplight, I whispered to the room, to myself, to Mom. It wasn't just a letter. It was a map back to the truth. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of injustice lift, replaced with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that what was mine had been reclaimed. Not through rage, not through confrontation, but through evidence, courage, and the undeniable bond of family and memory. Tonight, I was no longer invisible. Tonight, my story, my mother's legacy, and my rightful claim all stood in full light. It wasn't just a letter. It was a map back to the truth. I parked under a street lamp, headlights casting long shadows as I flooded the memory of that sealed envelope in my hands. I opened the glove compartment, pulled out the black box labeled May, trembling until I understood most of the tremor came from something stronger than fear. Knowing. Morning light came slowly, pearl dawn leaking between trees, soft instead of radiant. I drove to Aunt May's house before she'd even had coffee. Dew clung to her front steps. She wore a cardigan that smelled like lavender, and the small living room smelled like fresh biscuits. She placed 2 cups of tea before me, one chamomile, one bold black. We settled across from each other, the window open to humming cicadas. I lifted the box. Aunt May frowned, looked at me like she saw everything I carried. She said, "Your mother was always worried they'd make you invisible. That's why she left you that box." The voice inside those words shook something loose in me. Inside the box, receipts, voice memos from Mom and me, papers with names erased, loans unsigned by my knowledge, notes in Mom's handwriting warning of people who took credit, people who twisted meaning. There was one voice memo. I pressed play. Callista's voice. "Bryn won't fight us. She never does." That's her role. The certainty in her tone made me ache, but I also laughed, bitter and low, because maybe that role had been mine, but roles change. At Aunt May's table, I set the evidence I'd been gathering, email chains where I proposed the outreach project, memos, receipts, the linens, the deed from storage unit, voice messages I archived. I watched Aunt May listen, her eyes glistening. She touched my hand. "You have every right," she said. I left Aunt May's with a case forming in my mind. I drove home feeling the road beneath tires, each mile pushing me closer to exposure. I called my lawyer friend, Teresa, from college, who now works at a nonprofit legal clinic. I told her, I have proof, the voicemails, the contract, the deeds, Mom's letters. I need advice. She said, "Let's build a timeline, document everything. We can frame the story so people understand, not just the hurt, but the pattern." That word pattern, key, made the refusal to give credit look less like oversight and more like orchestration. Evening arrived shimmering with humidity. I watched from my motel window as messages on social media started, someone quoting the box, someone curious. Did Callista ever credit Bryn for the idea? I scrolled, heart pounding. The silent box, the May box, the truths inside, they were now whispers beyond my lips. The leak had begun. I dressed for the gala, intending to face what had to be faced. I rehearsed my speech in the mirror, not accusations, but statements of fact. I would stand firm, I would lift my voice. Callista wore elegance that night, diamond earrings, polished shoes, the kind of confidence that shines brightest under lights. I watched her from a distance as she posed for cameras. People praised her, said she made a difference. I held nothing back when I approached her afterward. I placed one proof in her hand, the receipt from her gala speech. I said quietly but unshakably, This came from me. This plan, this name, we were both hungry for the same thing, but one of us chose to remain invisible. Her eyes flicked, a understatement of panic. She tried a smile. "You're stirring things," she said, tone sharp. "This isn't your platform." I nodded as if in full respect of the difference between stage and roots. Because stage is loud, roots are unseen, but hold up the tree. She stepped away, guests murmured, cameras flashed. I felt humiliation, yes, prickly, hot on my skin, but also a surge of power. Photographs would show me walking away from applause I didn't ask for, toward dignity I reclaimed. Back in my motel room later, I placed the proofs, deed, voice memos, linens, on the dresser. I pressed into Mom's post-it. "If anyone ever tries to erase you, start here." I taped it above the contract, above my laptop. I felt something settle inside. I belonged to my own story now. I received a notification. Someone, in a thread under Callista's announcement, asked, "Why wasn't Bryn acknowledged in the original announcement? Small things, threads of accountability pulling taut." I sat, tea cooling beside me, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I won, but because I stopped hiding. The storm had started with rain, but now it was a reckoning. I watched my phone vibrate in my hand as I backed away from the motel mirror, the envelope from Mom pressed against my chest, deed and linen bundle in the other. Light from early afternoon seeped through the curtained window. I took a breath and typed a single line into Ronan's group chat. "You're invited. I want clarity." Later, I stood in my car in front of their house. The siding had been painted since the last storm. Gardens trimmed, porch lights welcoming. I stepped out, my dress simple, hair tied back, breath steady. I carried the USB drive tucked in a small clutch. Ronan met me at the door. Callista hovered behind. Their faces held tension, something like anticipation. "You came," Ronan said softly. "Yes," I replied. "For Dad's retirement dinner." My voice carried both grief and steel. I crossed the threshold. The living room smelled of freshly polished wood, lemon-scented cleaner, mashed potatoes simmered somewhere, cousins in ties, aunts with silver hair, uncles with gentle laughs, smiles stretched before me. I realized most of them believed the story they'd been told, that I was simply quiet, out of school, out of the frame. Callista approached with false warmth. "I'm glad you could make it, Bryn." Her lips curved just enough. Ronan's eyes dropped. No handshake. I felt the stiff air. Dinner passed in polite chatter. I forced myself to eat. Pot roast, green beans, rolls. Many said, "It's been so long." Others asked about my work. I smiled and said little. I picked at my food, tasted the gravy, the butter, the way home used to taste before everything was hidden. Then, as dessert plates cleared, Callista stepped forward. The room hushed. Someone dimmed the chandelier lights. She said, "We have a little presentation to honor Dad." She motioned to the projector screen. A tribute video played. Soft music, childhood photos, clips of Callista speaking about the shelter and the outreach. I recognized segments of my voice, phrases I wrote, wording I once rehearsed. I stood. With a steady hand, I slipped the USB from my clutch and swapped it with the one in the machine. The screen flickered. The first image that appeared was not the expected tribute, it was my voice recording. "You don't belong here," Callista had said, backstage, sheer tone heavy with dismissal. Then screenshots, deleted messages, drafts, faded emails, FEMA rejection letters with my name and address, but no assistance because of misfiled documents. Then Mom's document with its date stamp, drafts of Home Again Hope, full of my language and layout. Murmurs spread, faces went blank. Ronan leapt up, something between panic and anger. But before he spoke, I raised my hand. "You don't get to explain now. You had years." Callista's face paled. She stammered, "Bryn, this isn't how—" I cut across. "I didn't come here for excuses or tears. I came for truth. If I had stayed silent, I was complicit in their narrative, the one where I didn't exist." Guests shifted in their chairs. Some looked away, some stared. My cousins glanced at each other. A cousin whispered, "Wait, that was your idea?" I felt that knit of validation tighten. Ronan stood, voice trembling. You make it sound like I never tried. I stared him down. You tried when it was easy, when credit benefited your image. But when credit meant accountability, you vanished. Callista's lips quivered. She glanced at Ronan, then at family. This is going too far, I said, quietly but clear. I want my part back. I want my name where it belongs. Laughter didn't follow. Instead, heavy, awkward silence, crickets in the pause, the camera flashes from before flickered off. I turned and left the room, leaving the USB on the table, evidence on display. Guests whispered behind me. A niece reached, touched my sleeve. Aunt Bryn, I believe you. I paused in the doorway, then walked out into the night. Porch light flicked off behind me. Outside, humidity heavy, I pulled out my phone. I sent a message to Teresa. I'm ready to make it official. And I smelled rain coming, smelled something new, justice. Revenge wasn't the goal. Reclaiming myself was. And that night, I did. I left the gala behind. The applause, the glimmer, the stares, walking out into warm air, body humming with something I dared call relief. I drove away from the fake lights, but towards something more real. One evening, a month later, I pulled into a small bungalow by the lake in Baton Rouge. White siding with peeling paint in places, a porch swing, Spanish moss hanging heavy off oak trees. I unlocked the door with a key I earned, put down boxes of linens Mom stitched, photos, files. I made tea and opened windows to let the breeze sweep away stale air. I walked through empty room after empty room thinking, this is mine. I decide who enters. Weeks passed. I started a mentorship circle for women over 40 who felt invisible in their own families. I met them in a community center classroom, wheeled old chairs into a circle, drank lukewarm coffee. Faces lined with years of trying to be seen, stories of being sidelined, wives whose voices were silenced, daughters whose ideas were ignored, mothers who raised grandchildren without acknowledgement, and I told mine, not loud, but honest. They nodded when I spoke of being cut from the family photo, when I showed them the deed, the voice memos, the letters. Many cried quietly, some squeezed my hand. My story traveled quietly through newsletters, shared in advocacy groups under my name, not hidden anymore. People wrote back, I understand you. You deserve recognition. Thank you for your courage. Leah got one message. Aunt Bryn, I think your voice found others too. It stayed short, tender, and hopeful. I began drafting a letter to Leah. Not for now. Not until she understands all of this. I wrote, I didn't leave. I was pushed. But I built something better, where they couldn't erase me. I folded that letter and tucked it into a box with Mom's linens. I imagine the day Leah reads it, when she's old enough to know that family isn't just birth, but truth. One morning I drove past my old family home. Its windows were different, the lawn manicured. A realtor sign leaned in the yard. For sale. I slowed the car, let tears roll unchecked. It wasn't joy. It was release. I could let go. Rumors say Ronan stepped down from the shelter board after the truth came out, that he and Callista aren't speaking. I watched neighbors walking dogs, kids biking past, people going about life. The house would have passed through new hands by next week. At home, I spread out the linens. Each pillowcase, each hand-stitched border, embroidered with Mom's hope, became a canvas. I embroidered names, women who supported me, survivors I met in my circle, Leah, Aunt May, dear old neighbors. I threaded words. These linens will hold names now, names no one will dare erase again. My fingers ached from needlework. The thread glowed faint in lamplight. Late afternoon, I walked the lakeside trail. Spanish moss draped from branches, water lapped gently against shore. The sun tinged orange. I breathed in fresh air, felt wind on my skin, smelled swamp water and wood smoke. I thought, they took me for a storm. But storms don't destroy everything. Sometimes they clear space for something stronger to grow. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I paused, looked down. Unknown number. Strange but hopeful. I read, "Is this Bryn? I think you helped my mom once. Can we talk?" My heart caught. I typed nothing. I stared at the screen, unsure, but for once, I didn't want to hide. I held the phone in my hand and let the message be more than just words. It was possibility. Sometimes, the ones we expect to shelter us are the first to push us out into the cold. But being shut out doesn't mean you're finished. It means you've been given a blank page. Bryn's journey wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting her place in a story where she was once erased. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong in your own family? What would you do if someone tried to silence your truth? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional, true life stories. Your story might be next.